Hey there, quirky folks! I am your host, Anna, and in this Game of Thrones House of the Dragon season, I'm finally bringing you guys a video based on the most powerful Targaryen to this date, Aegon the Conqueror. He was the one that brought the House of Dragons to Westeros, and his conquest led to 300 years of Targaryen rulership over the Seven Kingdoms. Well, it was largely 6 kingdoms for a long while, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. In House of the Dragon, we've been following the story about 70 to 100 years after Aegon's conquest. The series has been going pretty well, as it is tapping the Game of Thrones audience by giving us something that's very similar. There's a scheming battle for the Iron Throne, brutality, incest, dragons, and a lot of great characters. The show is building up to the Dance of the Dragons, and this part of the Targaryen history taps the Game of Thrones vibe more than Aegon's story. So, we understand why House of the Dragon skipped Aegon the Conqueror and started at the end of Jaehaerys' reign. But now that people are hooked, we could easily get a prequel spin-off based on Aegon and his sisters. Its seasons could come out alternatively with the House of the Dragon. Before I go deep into Aegon's conquest and his reign, let me tell you why House of the Dragon missed a mark by not telling this story, and why the Aegon series would be such a great idea. If you directly want to know Aegon's story, then you could skip to this timestamp. Okay, so Aegon the First is obviously the most powerful Targaryen to have ever existed. His series would require a huge budget, and someone like Henry Cavill would play the role. His fandom in itself would draw in a huge crowd. But anyway, the big budget would allow greater visuals involving Aegon's massive dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, and we'd get to see the brutal battles that Aegon and his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys fought using their dragons. Speaking of them, Aegon wasn't the only hero drawing fans into the series. Visenya and Rhaenys played huge roles in the story as well, and their dragons Vhagar and Meraxes were also crucial. So together, these 3 powerful dragon riders would be giving us the true origins of everything we're familiar with in Westeros. We will see how the Targaryen banner with its 3 dragons came into play. We'd see how Aegon created positions like the Hand of the King, the Small Council, and eventually the Kingsguard as well. These are the things and traditions that followed for generations to come. This story would also tell us how the curse of Harrenhal began. Besides these origins, we might get a definitive answer to how the Doom of Valyria truly happened. And as I've mentioned above, there would be some great battles like the Field of Fire and the several wars fought in Dornish lands. This series will be very different from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. That's because we'll be aware of the protagonists right from the beginning. But still, there will be plenty of amazing supporting characters like Orys Baratheon, Torrhen Stark, and several others. They'll be telling us the histories of all other major houses of Game of Thrones. Now that I've teased why an Aegon's Conquest series will be a great idea, let me go deeper into its story and tell you how exactly Aegon conquered the 6 kingdoms and what happened next. Aegon's Conquest. In 27 BC, Aeron Targaryen and Valyna Velaryon gave birth to Aegon Targaryen. He had an older sister, Visenya, and following him came his younger sister, Rhaenys. In-house marriages were a Targaryen tradition. So, it is believed that Aegon married Visenya out of duty to hold their seat at Dragonstone. But then he fell in love with his younger sister Rhaenys, so he married her as well. Before his marriages, he also bonded with the greatest dragon of all time, Balerion. It is said that Balerion was so huge that his shadow could have covered entire towns from up above. Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes were the greatest weapons that Aegon and co had. And nobody except the Kingdom of Dorne really had an answer to these dragons. Living in Dragonstone, Aegon knew that there was nothing in the east. Old Valyria had nothing to offer after its doom. But Aegon saw Westeros as a land of gold. At this time, it was divided into 7 kingdoms with each of them having their own kings and lords. But flying over Westeros, Aegon saw the entire piece of land as one realm that should be conquered under one king. Starting from the top, Winterfell was ruled by King Torrhen Stark. Just below him and to the left of him, the Riverlands and the Iron Islands were ruled by King Harrenhal, the Black. Then to the right, Shara Aaron ruled over the Vale. Moving straight down to the south, Dorne was under Princess Maria Martell. Then to the west, King Loren Lannister ruled over the Westerlands. Below him, the Reach was ruled by King Mern Gardener. And to his right, King Argilag Durrandon ruled over the Stormlands. All these kingdoms fought each other for centuries, so Aegon started to pick them up one by one. First, Aegon, his sister wives, and his friend Orys Baratheon raised a small army and landed at the mouth of the Blackwater River. This is where he built his first fort in Westeros, called the Aegon Fort. After setting up his base, Rhaenys and Visenya took over the nearby castles of Storkworth and Roseby with their dragons. Hearing about it, an army of 3,000 men was raised by the lords of Maidenpool and Duskendale, but they were no match for Aegon's dragons. To celebrate these victories, Aegon held a ceremony at the Aegon fort. Visenya crowned Aegon, and Rhaenys named him the King of Westeros. So, this new king let his defeated enemies keep their lands as long as they agreed to join him. This was the first time the banner of Targaryens, including 3 dragons, was unfolded. Looking at the banner, the lords thought that Aegon was a worthy High King for Westeros. Beyond this point, Aegon's conquest took up speed. He did have a few setbacks, but at the end, he always had his dragons to rely upon. Something like this happened at Gulltown, where a fleet of ships was sent under Daemon Valarian's leadership. Daemon died, and this fleet almost lost as well. But Visenya showed up on Vhagar and burnt the enemies of the Vale. Meanwhile, Aegon moved to his biggest challenge, King Harrenhal. He was a cruel king who reached his success through extreme slavery. He built a massive castle at Harrenhal. Hearing what Aegon had achieved so far, Harren's 2 sons tried to attack Aegon by stealth before he reached Harrenhal. They were successful in killing a few soldiers at night, but then Aegon burnt them and marched on to their father with an army of 8,000 soldiers. Along the way, Edmund Tully joined their cause. When they reached the castle, Harren refused to even come out. He thought that it was safe to stay in there as his stone-made castle wouldn't burn. But then Aegon fully unleashed Balerion. He totally lit up the castle with a fire that could easily burn down an entire forest. Everything within the castle that was made of wood began to heat up and burn. All the men within perished, including King Harrenhal. So, upon taking over Harrenhal, Aegon appointed Edmund Tully to rule over the land in his stead. He left the Iron Islands intact for a few years, but then took over them as well. He allowed them to pick their own leader, and Vicon Greyjoy was chosen, who is the ancestor of Yara, Theon, and Euron Greyjoy. Meanwhile, Rhaenys and Orys Baratheon marched to Storm's End, but having heard of their exploits, King Argilac had sent a huge army to battle them midway. Rhaenys had seen this army approaching midway, so even she was ready. The battle took place during a heavy storm, which was called the Last Storm. Because of it, the dragon Meraxes was mostly ineffective during this fight. But the Targaryens still prevailed, as when King Argilac reached Rhaenys, his men were burnt alive by Meraxes. Then Orys Baratheon killed Argilac in a one-on-one battle. He took the castle at Storm's End, married Argilac's daughter, and the House Baratheon was formed. Then Aegon began his march to the Reach. But this was going to be another big challenge, as Loren Lannister and King Merngardener had united their forces. Their army of over 50,000 was the largest ever, and they met Aegon in a dry grass field. While Aegon's army was small, he had 3 large dragons in play. Visenya and Rhaenys trapped those men from the sides and the back, and Aegon attacked them from the front. Their 3 dragons burnt thousands of men alive that day and created a field of fire. King Loren escaped and surrendered, so he was made the Warden of the Westerlands. But King Mern and the entire House Gardener died. They had ruled over the Reach for thousands of years, but they were replaced by House Tyrell, and Harlan Tyrell was chosen as their new leader. Then, after conquering 4 of the 7 kingdoms, Aegon heard that King Torrhen Stark from the north had began his march with 30,000 Northmen. So, he decided to meet him with an even bigger army of the 4 kingdoms. Looking at that massive army, Torrhen Stark decided to kneel. He was named the Warden of the North, but he was always known as the King Who Knelt. From there on, the North didn't have a king until Jon Snow became the King of the North. Winterfell always had Wardens of the North. Then they put their focus onto the Vale. Queen Shara Arryn fortified her castle and readied her defenses, but none of that was of any use, as Visenya just flew over them and landed Vhagar in the middle of her castle. As Shara approached Visenya, she saw that her little son was sitting in Visenya's lap, asking for a ride on the dragon. He got his wish, and so did Visenya, as Shara yielded. So now, Aegon had conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms, and their final target was the southern sands of Dorne. Rhaenys flew on Meraxes to take over Dorne, but everywhere she went, she found empty castles with their lords having fled. They never exposed their armies to be burnt alive. They just hid until the Targaryens left. Ultimately, Rhaenys reached Sunspear and found their castle empty too. Only this time, the ruler of Dorne, Princess Maria Martell, was present there. The blind and fat princess told Rhaenys that Dorne wouldn't fight the Targaryens, but they wouldn't yield either. She asked her to leave Dorne and never come back. So Rhaenys left for a while and reunited with Aegon at Oldtown. This was the largest city of Westeros, and it was surrendered to Aegon by Lord Manfred Hightower. Then, the High Septon declared Aegon to be king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. He moved back to the town that was forming near Aegon Fort, and that town later came to be called King's Landing. Aegon decided to rule from there, and he had the Iron Throne created for himself with the swords of his fallen enemies. The small council was formed with Orys Baratheon serving as the hand of the king. Aegon declared the Law of the King's Peace, which forbade any conflict within the inner houses of the realm. After that, the Targaryens once again set their eyes on Dorne. Rhaenys went back there a decade later for the First Dornish War, and that's when she met her end. She was shot down from the sky as an iron bolt went through the eyes of Meraxes. Rhaenys died, and Aegon just couldn't win over the guerrilla tactics of Dorne. Aegon placed bounties on the heads of Dornish lords to take his revenge for Rhaenys, but he wasn't successful with that, and several attempts were made to his own life. Ultimately, the elite Kingsguard was formed to protect him. But after that, Aegon came to a peaceful resolution with Dorne when the skull of Meraxes was returned to him. Dorne was left alone, and Aegon always had 6 kingdoms under his rule. Although Dorne did join the Union of Westeros 100 years later through diplomacy and marriage. That's when all the 7 kingdoms truly came under the Targaryen rule. But still, Aegon had to manage to take 6 kingdoms, and he proved to be the most powerful Targaryen of all time. It is clear that we need to have a series based on Aegon. There would be plenty of dragon action, some powerful characters, and glorious battles to look forward to. It would prove to be one of the best shows in the Game of Thrones universe. Would you like to watch a series based on Aegon's Conquest? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed this video. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next one.